Good morning. It is 9:01 a.m. Wednesday, May 20th. This is the TDN Writers Room presented by Keeneland. My name is Joe Bianca. I'm the associate editor of the Thoroughbred Daily News, and spring is finally here in the New York, New Jersey area, like 3 weeks before summer.
And I'm Bill Finley. I'm a correspondent for the Thoroughbred Daily News. It's closing week at Will Rogers Downs, and frankly, I'm going to miss the place.
Jonathan Green, DJ Stable, general manager. And after I wrote that op-ed piece, I understand that I will always be considered the 141st mayor for any stallion.
Alan Carasso, managing editor of the TDN. And I'm personally still coming down from the final 2 episodes of The Last Dance Sunday night. Great way to spend 5 weeks.
The best part was at the end where they were like, the Bulls have been rebuilding ever since.
Then they have. The exception of Derrick Rose, that's it.
Yeah, it's good that Bill has found he's been able to fit the Fire Park-sized hole in his heart with Will Rogers. We don't know what he'll do without it. The TDN Writers Room is brought to you by Keeneland. A reminder that wagering through Keeneland Select is a great way to support the hardworking backstretch community right now. Proceeds from all wagers placed through Keeneland Select this month will benefit Nourish the Backstretch, providing weekly meals and groceries to stable area workers at Keeneland and the Thoroughbred Center. You can sign up at www.keenelandselect.com. So here we go. We are basically fully back right now. There's a couple tracks that are not running yet that we'll discuss and we'll touch on a little bit later. But we've got NYRA back coming June 3rd is when the meet starts. We've got Churchill Downs and Santa Anita back over the past weekend, and we'll talk about the racing from there. But obviously, the big news of the week is the announcement of the date and the distance of the Belmont Stakes. So now we have the entire rescheduled, rejiggered Triple Crown set. We have the Belmont Stakes run June 20th, only 2 weeks later than it was supposed to, but the big difference is going to be run at 9 furlongs instead of a mile and a half. Then we have a big gap to the Kentucky Derby on September 5th, and then a 4-week break to the Preakness Stakes on October 3rd. A lot to break down here, a lot of implications. We're going to talk to Martin Panza from NYRA in a little bit and try to figure out the reasoning and the logistics behind this move. The big thing I think a lot of people have issue with is running the race at 9 furlongs. I think people are very understanding about the schedule and that this was never going to be an orthodox Triple Crown. I kind of see that, especially because at Belmont, a mile and an eighth is the only track in America, as far as I know, where it's a one-turn mile and an eighth. So that's kind of, I don't know, it seems a little bit like closer to a mile and a 16th or a mile the way that is. And I understand people are thinking it's supposed to be a classic. This kind of takes a little bit of the challenge out of the Belmont. It kind of just seems like another big 3-year-old race right now. I'm not going to go crazy over it. I'm just glad that Belmont is back running and that we're going to have these great 3-year-olds competing in a couple of weeks now. The thing that I think is interesting about it is I think that now this race will get a better field than it almost certainly would have gotten as the third leg of the Triple Crown, because the Belmont is kind of left in the lurch a lot of ways in a normal Triple Crown because everybody goes to the Derby. A lot of people pass on the Preakness, but some people will try to run back and bottle that lightning real quick for the Preakness. And then 3 weeks later, unless there's a Triple Crown on the line, trainers and owners are really starting to think about the summer and point towards the summer races. In this way, Bill was in his story yesterday reported that Bob Baffert's thinking of sending both Charlatan and Nadal to the Belmont. I don't think that would be the case in a normal year. So I think in that way, it's really beneficial to have it as the first race on the Triple Crown calendar. I'll leave it open to you guys. What are your thoughts?
Well, Joe, I mean, so much to cover here. Let's start with the distance thing. And I was surprised yesterday, spending time on social media and looking around. A lot of people really were complaining about the mile and a half versus the mile and an eighth. And yes, tradition and how much of it's not the test of champions. But I wonder how much would people be complaining if they ran it at a mile and a half and they got 6 horses, didn't get Charlatan and Nadal. No way they would have run in this race at a mile and a half. And it just didn't work. I mean, we wish things were normal. We wish we're having the Triple Crown where we just got concluded with the Preakness and we're getting ready for the Belmont. That wasn't going to happen. And if they put it at a mile and a half, they were not going to get the kind of field that you would hope to get for the Belmont Stakes. And I think it's somewhat of a pleasant surprise when you throw this race up, out of the middle of nowhere. You tell people, get ready, you have a month, a mile and eighth. You go down the list of the top 3-year-olds in the country, and some really big names are pointing to the Belmont. You have, of course, the Baffert horses I just mentioned, Tis the Law for Barclay Tagg, the Florida Derby winner. And I can tell you, if they ran this race at a mile and a half, it wouldn't have gotten anywhere near the kind of field you would hope for a Belmont Stakes. And people would be complaining a blue streak about why there's 7 horses in the Belmont and the favorite is a horse that just won an allowance race somewhere. They had to adjust. They had to adjust on the fly. It's not perfect, but I think it was absolutely the right call.
No, I love the fact that for this year, and probably this year only, the Belmont is not only going to be earlier than the other Triple Crown races. It'll be the initial race in the Triple Crown, but also the fact that they did back it down to 9 furlong. You can call it a sprint because it's a one-turn race. But the fact that they placed it so early in the calendar is actually a really interesting decision. Let's call it what it is. The Belmont for 2020 is going to be a Kentucky Derby prep. The distances, has been reduced. The race has been moved up in the calendar, and they announced that there's going to be points for Kentucky Derby points for the first 4 finishers, to the tune of 150 points for the winner, which is by far the most number of points out of any prep that's been offered so far. So yes, I mean, I'm a big believer in tradition. Certainly the fact that the race is going back to its original distance, and it was originally run at 9 furlongs until 1926. So it's almost been 100 years since they've been running it at a mile and a half. But let's call a spade a spade. It is now this year a Kentucky Derby prep. And for that reason, when you look at it through that lens, it couldn't have been placed in a better spot to have $1 million prep on June 20th.
Yeah, I'm just happy as a fan of racing to have the Belmont Stakes to look forward to. I mean, people complaining about the 9 furlongs and it's not a real test. And I'm just happy to have it to look forward to. And people, it is what it is. The situation demanded some outside the box thinking, and it just needed to happen this way. And Jay Privman tweeted a list of the horses. Bill mentioned the Charlatan, Nadal, Tis the Law. Bill, I think you said that Pat Bianca is going to bring Silvolante. So it's going to be a quality race. It's going to be a group of the best 3-year-olds. It'd be interesting to see if the Matt Winn Stakes that runs this weekend, if anything, certainly something will come out of it. I mean, in theory, as a second up race for a horse like Maxfield, I mean, he could be an interesting new shooter, so to speak, in a race like the Belmont. So I think people need to take a chill pill and just be happy that Belmont's back. Everything kind of returning normal, whatever the new normal is. Let's just go forward and be happy.
John, don't tell Martin Panza you think the Belmont is a Kentucky Derby prep now. I don't know if they see it that way just yet. The interesting thing, I mean, we kind of touched on this last week, and I talked about it last week, that this is not going to be seen, I think, historically as a historically significant Triple Crown. And I'm interested to hear what you guys think about it, because, the whole thing about the Triple Crown is being able to win 3 races in 5 weeks, which especially now with today's horses, which how infrequently they run, it's really a Herculean task to do that. So I think in the record books, like, this year is going to have to be like, we should list the winners. But if some horse happens to go on and win all 3 races, I don't know that you can really consider that a legitimate Triple Crown winner. As far as the distance thing, like, I just think people, especially racing people, and especially racing people on Twitter, is even more especially, just love to complain about stuff. Like, it's just, there's no more disgruntled, malcontent. Let me stop right now, because I'm a part of that racing Twitter. But no, like, people just they love to complain, and I get it. Like, it was never going to be a traditional Belmont, never going to be a traditional Triple Crown. But there, like I said last week, there are so many other sports fans right now, other sports, who would die just for a little bit of action for basketball, baseball, whatever it is. Football season. And football season comes around in the fall, and that's not happening. People are going to go nuts. So you should just be thankful right now, if you're a racing fan, that you get to see top horses racing at the biggest tracks in America, because there are a lot of people right now who are not getting that kind of entertainment. And I think that's something that we should all have in the forefront of our minds right now is how cool and how unique it is to have racing back on a large scale like this. But it's a good little digression right there, just because, people love to complain, man. It really gets tiresome. I stopped reading the replies to a lot of TDN tweets because it's almost always something negative. But in terms of the Triple Crown, like I do think that this year is going to have to kind of be a mulligan in terms of recording it for the history books. Bill, what do you think?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's highly unlikely that a horse will win the Triple Crown. I mean, after going all those years when nobody won it, now we're thinking, oh, it's not that hard because two horses have won it since 2015. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it, Joe. I mean, obviously it's not traditional, but here's point number one. There are Triple Crown winners back from the 30s going backwards in that era that won in a time frame or a sequence that is not the traditional order. Gallon Fox won the Preakness first, then the Kentucky Derby. So it's not as if every single Triple Crown winner had to win the Kentucky Derby, come back 2 weeks later, win the Preakness, come back 3 weeks later to win the Belmont Stakes. And I can take sort of a flip side of your argument that, it's not going to be as difficult as winning 3 races in 5 weeks. But now you've got to keep your form going for all these weeks and months from June 6th until October 3rd. That in and of itself is difficult, and more difficult than a horse maintaining his form for 5 weeks. And also in the Triple Crown, we get the Derby horses, then some come back for the Preakness, many don't, many point for the Belmont, and the Belmont you get a few new shooters. I think for a horse to win the Triple Crown this year, they're going to have to go through waves of horses. I mean, there could be horses running in the Preakness that, aren't on anybody's radar right now for the first leg, the Belmont. So, does it deserve an asterisk? I don't know. Let's wait and see what happens. But, I don't think it's going to be, it's certainly not going to be an easy feat. And again, there is precedent in history that the Triple Crown winners don't necessarily have to have had that sequence. So I think that people are downplaying the difficulty of it compared to the normal Triple Crown is a little bit off base.
Yeah, and Bill, with I thought about what you said last week about Gallon Fox and the fact that he did it out of order. And to me personally, the order, the sequence of the races isn't the important thing. It's Joe put it, the Herculean task of winning 3 races within 5-6 weeks of each other and having to travel for each one of those separate races. So to me, the fact that there's an elongated schedule between some of these races, that to me is the reason why the asterisk should be placed if we even get a Triple Crown winner. And like you said before, Bill, the odds of that happening aren't great, especially with all of the healthy horses that are heading into the Triple Crown races right now. So to me, it may be an argument that we don't even need to have. But I don't have a vote. If I was a voter, I would say that this certainly would be an entire year of asterisks when it comes to stake races and performances. Some asterisks, meaning it was tainted, like the Triple Crown, if it was too far apart, and other things like some of these horses that are winning stake races in May and June of this year, with the competition they had to go up against and the deep fields and everything. They need to have like a positive asterisk as far as, hey, that was just a yeoman's work winning or even placing in a graded stake race, during the spring of 2020.
I mean, I think pretty firmly that it would be asterisk. 10 furlongs on the first Saturday in May, 9.5, 2 weeks later, and 12 furlongs, 21 days later is much different than what we're going to have this year. I agree with you, Bill. It's still going to take a giant effort to win all 3 races. I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility, notwithstanding the fact that you've had American Pharoah and Justified do it. But going back to what I said a few minutes ago, I just don't care. I hope a horse does it. And I mean, I do think it would be asterisk within the context of history, but I'm okay with that.
Bill brought up something interesting in his weekend review as well, and they haven't released the Saratoga stake schedule yet. One would think that in order to not go up against the Derby, that they're going to run the Travers either the last weekend of July, first weekend in August, that kind of thing. And whether or not we're going to see horses try to go for a quadruple crown. Barkley Tagg said that he's going to try to go in all 4 races with Tis the Law. But I wonder still, even with that like 4 or 5 week gap, I wonder if it's still going to cannibalize the Travers, because, the Derby is still the Derby. And I think, the Belmont and the Preakness, the way that they're set up, it's such that they're dependent on what happens in the Derby for their level of importance. What happens in the Derby makes the Preakness more important. What happens in the Derby and the Preakness makes the Belmont more or less important. So in that way, I think that, most trainers are still going to center their 3-year-olds' calendar around the Derby. And I wonder if the Travers is going to be a little bit reduced because of that, even if they space it correctly. But Bill, do you really think that trainers are going to try to run in all 4 of these races? Like, I get that they haven't been able to run these horses as much as they want to this year, but I was just talking about like how horses don't run as frequently these days anymore. Do you think that's a real possibility?
Yes and no. I mean, some people might try it, but the fact that people would say, "Oh my God, I can't have 4 races in the span of 4 months or something," I mean, that just speaks volumes about where we are at in horse racing. And this is something that is, a pet peeve of mine and has been for years. But I think you're probably right. Oh no, we can't possibly run in the Travers because we need 8 weeks off before we run in the next race. And oh boy, I can't tax my horse so much to actually run him 6 times this year. That speaks volumes about the modern thinking of trainers. And again, I just don't get it. And I think it's kind of ridiculous. I can't wait till we, go back more to the Iron Horse days, which I think is going to happen someday soon. But it makes it an interesting, an interesting schedule. And I mean, the Travers fits just like a glove in between these 2 races. So, I mean, they could get some horses out of the Belmont. They could get some horses that are kind of late developers that miss the Belmont. I think one way or another, the Travers would be a very good race. Is it going to unofficially become a quadruple crown? Probably not. But, as long as NYRA moves the Travers, and I see no reason why they wouldn't, then I think it's going to fit in very nicely and, really set up for a 4-race series, albeit not everybody's going to run in all 4, but we can look at these 4 races in one after another in a row and say, this is going to be a really nice progression for the 3-year-olds, starting with June 6th, ending October 3rd with Preakness.
There's a little alley-oop right there for you to complain about horses not running too frequently.
The steal one from Michael Jordan, right?
Yep.
I think that definitely the next few months are going to be as exciting as it's been difficult and boring for us the past couple of months. And the arguments about whether or not horses should run in the Triple Crown races, the Quadruple Crown. And don't forget, there's a little $1 million race here on the Jersey Shore called the Haskell that is always, always has a couple of Baffert horses and always has a couple of horses that fall out of the Triple Crown and end up running on the Jersey Shore. And that's going to be July 18th. So, you have the Haskell that, again, is probably up against the Travers. And Monmouth Park decided, interestingly enough, that it was going to be 7 weeks before the Kentucky Derby, which, they may have looked at the calendar and said, this is the sweet spot as far as other competition, and that's why we want to run it. Or, hey, we have a feeling that if some of these races fall out the way they do with the Belmont earlier, and then kind of a dearth of time, and then the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness, this might be a landing spot for some of those horses that want to have that extra space now and then go hard after it, for the Derby and the Preakness, and then roll right into the Breeders' Cup. So I think we have multiple races that are going to be out there for these young 3-year-olds, and it's going to be a really exciting opportunity for us as podcasters and as fans of the sport to watch and see the head games that go on and the strategy that goes on, especially for the super trainers that have multiple horses that they can put in these Grade 1 races. Because at the end of the day, don't forget, Kentucky only wants Grade 1 winners for stallions.
Joe, if you gave Bill an alley-oop, John, you just blocked my shot. So thanks for that, buddy.
Which is really hard to do when you're 5'6". That doesn't happen too
And
often.
I am 5'6". So there you go. I was going to mention the same thing. You wonder, is it possible that Monmouth moves the Haskell forward by a week? I mean, Indiana changed their schedule. How about the Indiana Derby being on a Wednesday afternoon? That's strange and kind of fun all at the same time.
Like when they used to play World Series games in the afternoon.
Right?
World Series. Nobody can complain now that we're neglecting Indiana.
That's right. That's 2 weeks in a row. We gave a shout out to Indiana.
But you wonder too about the Santa Anita Derby. Like, how is that race going to be impacted? Now, I mean, it seemed when we talked to Baffert a few weeks ago that Charlatan and Nadal were maybe iffy for that race. Authentic seemed to be the right one. Honor AP is still going to go there. So maybe the profile of the Santa Anita Derby doesn't change all that much. But you do wonder if a race like the Haskell takes a hit, or would they consider moving it to July 11th and potentially 3 weeks ahead of the Travers if they were to position that August 4th. So, lots of, you wonder what backroom conversations might be taking place, but some interesting things to come.
Yeah, and it's going to be a mad scramble this summer, and I think it's like John said, it's going to be great for us. It's going to be great for the fans. As depressing and as kind of vast of a wasteland we had for these last 2 months, it's going to be really action-packed this summer, with the 3-year-old races, with Keeneland trying to, get in a summer meet with, it's going to be a lot of fun and there's going to be a lot to talk about. And, it's going to be great because, even though you're going to be able to pick your spots because there are going to be a lot of races available, you're only going to have a certain amount of time to get in these races. So I think even with a lot of 3-year-old races available, I think the summer is going to be action-packed. There's going to be top 3-year-olds all over the place. I think it is going to hurt some of the lesser derbies like the Indiana Derby, the West Virginia Derby, those kind of races. I think that in the end, those are kind of, I don't know, if they're not going to be not run this year, they might have purse reductions or become, listed stakes because of the fields, but next year, but I think overall top racing back in America, pretty much all across the country, is a great thing, and we're all very grateful to see it. We'll be right back after this message from Keeneland. This week's news is sponsored by West Point Thoroughbreds. Owning a multiple grade stakes winning racehorse like Hard Not to Love is attainable with a racing partnership like West Point Thoroughbreds. Partnerships enable you to spread your ownership across several horses for less than it costs to own one horse alone. This increases your racetrack action and chances for a big horse. Check out why West Point Thoroughbreds is the gold standard in racing partnerships. Visit westpointtb.com. So more NYRA news on the docket this week. NYRA really did like a big news dump yesterday, which is why we're glad to have Martin Panza on the show. They had the announcement for the Belmont. They had the stakes schedule come out. They had some new safety initiatives that we might touch on with him in terms of protecting horses who are coming off long layoffs and horses that are making belated career debuts. But we'll go through the stakes schedule right here and what it means. They are going to have a 25-day meet. There's going to be a stakes race every single day at the Belmont Spring Summer Meet, which reminds me, obviously, of Saratoga. So that's something they've tried to do at Saratoga for a while. First one is Wednesday, June 3rd is opening day. They're going to have the Grade 3 Bogey for older fillies and mares on the turf. And then they're going to have a couple of big weekends. Opening Saturday, June 6th, they have the Run Happy Carter Handicap, usually run at Aqueduct. It's going to be run at Belmont and take the place of the John Nehru Stakes. We're also going to have the Westchester, the Intercontinental, and the Fort Marcy. Following weekend, they have the Ogden Phipps, Grade 1 for older fillies and mares on dirt. Then Belmont Stakes Day, not quite the blockbuster card we're used to, but still some really good races. They have the Grade 1 Acorn, the Grade 1 Jiper Stakes, the Grade 1 Woody Stevens, and then the Grade 2 Pennine Ridge and the Grade 3 Wonder Again Stakes. And then the following Saturday, the Grade 1 Just a Game, Grade 2 New York and True North handicaps, and then the Vagrancy handicap of Grade 3. And then July 4th, which is a Saturday this year, they have the Grade 1 Manhattan, the Grade 1 Run Happy Metropolitan handicap, then the Suburban, the Victory Ride, and the Poker. Last graded stake of the meet is Saturday, July 11th, the Grade 2 Ruffian Stakes. So a lot of action. It kind of goes back to what we were just talking about how we're going to have a lot of action crammed into a very short amount of time here this summer in the summer racing season. it's interesting that I think the way they're doing it to cram all these stakes in, it suggests to me that they're really determined to run up at Saratoga. It seems like they're trying not to have any bleed over into the Saratoga meet so they can run a traditional Saratoga meet. And, we've questioned the wisdom of that in the past, but I think it's going to end up being a great racing product. It's going to be purse cuts, so it's not going to be 100% great for the horsemen. But I think what they've tried to do is do the purse cuts at the top of the ladder, and so that they can spread the money more equitably in terms of the trainers and the owners filling the cards on a day-to-day basis. General reactions from you guys about the NYRA stakes game?
Yeah, I mean, making the best of a bad situation, I think, is the theme for this, just like it was the theme for the Belmont Stakes. It is pretty sobering to see these purse cuts, though. I mean, the Met Mile from $1.2 million to $500,000, Grade 1 stakes on the card, only for $250,000 purses. Several of the stakes races that were $700,000 cut down to $400,000. But I think NYRA had to look at this and say, where are we going to make the major cuts? Are we going to make it in the stake schedule, or are we going to make it in the overnight races? Now, the overnight races were cut, but the not to the draconian degree that they were for the stake schedule. Martin Panza told me the overnight races are cut about 13%. So, they need to get the money into all the trainers, not just the Chad Browns and the Todd Pletchers, et cetera, that be running in these Grade 1 races. And also, too, I don't think that the cutting the stakes purses is really going to affect them that much. I mean, I can't see anybody out there saying, I'm not going to run in the Met Mile because it's only worth $500,000, or I'm not going to run in the Ogden Phipps because it's only worth $400,000. People are hungry to run now. Everybody's eager to get their horses back in training and back into the starting gate. So I think NYRA looked at this situation and realized, how are we going to make this as palatable as possible? And I think they decided, obviously, to cut the stakes races a lot more than the overnight purses. But I think that was actually the fair thing to do. And the other point, too, and a common theme that I've been bringing up and other people have been bringing up on the podcast, just shows you the dangers of racing's marriage to slot machines and what can happen when you pull the plug on them. And this is 90% of the reason why the purses had to get slashed is because there's no slot revenues coming in from the casino at Aqueduct. So, we'll save the rest of that as a subject for another day. But, it's scary to see racing so reliant on slot machine revenues because they can be taken away at any moment.
Yeah, Bill, and the fact that the purses, at least initially, the meat and potato races, the overnight races, are only being reduced by 13% is probably a godsend, especially in comparison to what they're anticipating. Delaware's purses are going to be reduced, and Parks, if they ever get running, what the first few months might look like for those purses, where they may be reduced in half. And that may be conservative because they have to wait. There's a lag time between when they can get the monies from the casinos and have it actually permeate all the way through to the horsemen's accounts into the purses. So the fact that we're only down, 13% on the overnight races, on the day-to-day races, is a wonderful thing. I love the fact that they're still giving away $7 million in stake races. And I'm even happier about the fact that they paced it out. So they have a black type race every single race day. To me as a fan, that's a wonderful thing. It anchors a lot of the cards that they have, and it brings some excitement, across the board, because usually you get better horses in there. And again, from a breeding standpoint, it has such great, ripple effect through that industry that, makes people want to sit up and at least watch a couple of races from New York on a Thursday or on a non-weekend. So I absolutely applaud the fact that we're racing, that they did the right thing for the average trainer and the average owner, which is basically keep the regular purses, the same. And that we're having all of these great opportunities to run stake races literally on a daily basis. So I'm very excited as a fan. I'm even more excited as an owner that races in New York, that this is the kind of meet that you hope for. And Joe, to go back to your point previously, yeah, it looks like that things are pointing towards a Saratoga meet if they're not saving any of these races to run during the summer. That, to me, that was the game plan or the thought process in my own head in the wintertime was, okay, you take some of these wonderful grade 1 races or grade 2 races, and you move them a couple of weeks over into the Saratoga meet, but Saratoga stays home, and there's Saratoga South, and it stays at Aqueduct or Belmont. But it really looks like now that all indications are that they're going to be up and running and training at Oklahoma and the main track in a couple of weeks.
I think we should rename that stretch of Hempstead Turnpike Elmont Springs for this spring of stakes a day. One thing that Martin Panza has done throughout his career, he's been an innovator, and he's brought new and exciting ideas to horse racing. He brought the American Oaks to California when he was out at Hollywood Park, and did the same thing at Belmont with the Derby, Belmont Derby and Belmont Oaks. So those two races have been not scheduled for the summer, but he did say that they were going to come back later on the calendar, which is great to see. But you've kept the stakes races, you've kept a race like the Met Mile. It'll be on July 4th, so maybe those who've complained that it's off of Memorial Day and on a Belmont Day, now it's a here you go, Joe. So it'll be the centerpiece of the holiday program again. So, and it's a great race in and of itself, by itself, a standalone grade 1 mile, going one turn, a classic race. So again, let the complainers complain, but I'm excited about it.
Joe, they moved that race to July 4th strictly so that way I could bring my horse up from Florida. You know that.
Why does it take so long to come from Florida?
Well, we like to get him his exercise, so he's not vanning. He's actually going to jog up the whole time. We want him to be the iron horse. He's 6 years old, for God's sake. He's got a lot of tread on his tire.
Wait, you own Rick's Natural Star? Wait.
Al stole my thunder. You blocked my shot there.
Man.
I used to love having the Met Mile be its centerpiece race on Memorial Day at NYRA, and now it's back on a holiday. There are some other grade 1 races on that card with the Manhattan, but it's great to see it take center stage again and not just be another Belmont undercard race. That always got my goat. So I look forward to seeing Blue Buff in there, John. Probably going to be 4 to 5 or so, I would think. I'm not sure. Not sure who else is going to show up if they know you're coming.
If he's there, Joe, you can represent us. I promise.
Can I ride him?
No, if you can get down to 125, sure.
I don't know. By the end of quarantine, I might be 125. I'm sick of all my food. But yeah, I mean, look, they did the best with a bad situation, and honestly, I didn't think that they were going to open quite as early as they are. I thought it was going to be more towards mid-June. So they had to cram a lot into a short amount of time, and especially if they're going to try to turn around and have a full Saratoga meet. So it's going to be great for the bettors. It's going to be great for us to watch and talk about. And, just hats off to everybody on the Belmont backstretch and NYRA for getting through this, because it's been scary. It's been scary for a lot of us, but it's been scary for the places that have specifically had outbreaks. And they've by all accounts have done the right things, and they're going to be rewarded with a great month plus of racing. So we're happy for them. We're happy as a New Yorker, happy for everybody that's on the backstretch and working at NYRA, because this didn't seem like an inevitability a month ago, but we're here now, and we're thankful for it. Joining a West Point Thoroughbreds partnership can vault you into the world of instant camaraderie among people surrounding high-class horses and stakes action for a fraction of the cost of trying to do it on your own. Learn more at westpointtb.com. We'll be right back after this message from West Point Thoroughbreds. So we got back to big racing in America last weekend. We got Santa Anita back on Friday. We got Churchill back on Saturday, and Churchill especially. There was really no hesitancy for the good horses to show up. We had Monomoy Girl. She was the headliner on Saturday in the 4th race, came back in an okay allowance, not a terrible field, but probably not great at stakes level. She honestly didn't seem that comfortable to me the way she was traveling early on in the race. She was kind of taken back in between horses, behind horses. I thought it was a little bit of a cute ride, honestly, by Florent Giroux. I thought he would send her to the front, especially since nobody else really sent. But it seems like he knew what he was doing. She was able to sit off the pace and really run away in the stretch and prove her class once again. And, she is not the prettiest mover in the world, but damn if she's not a winner, because you look at her career record now, it's 10 wins in 12 lifetime starts, 2 losses. One was by a neck after setting a fast pace in the Goldenrod as a juvenile. And then one was when she got DQ'd after beating Midnight Bisou in the Cotillion. So you don't see too many horses with those kind of resumes at the grade 1 level that she has and those kind of records. And it was just a pleasure to watch her back. And I thought it was kind of emblematic and metaphorical in terms of what we've all been dealing with and now what we get to see as racing fans back on the calendar. And I thought she was a pleasure to watch. I think it's going to be really interesting. Al had a good story with Jeff Bloom on Midnight Bisou the other day. I think it's going to be very interesting to see if and when those two match up again. It seems like they're completely different horses. They had a couple good battles in their 3-year-old years. I mentioned the Cotillion, but now Midnight Bisou is a world traveler. She was second in the Saudi Cup. She's a champion, and she's, I think, a 5-time grade 1 winner. Monomoy Girl's exploits at 3 speak for themselves, but she didn't run for an entire 4-year-old year and now just has this one race under her belt as a 5-year-old. Jeff Bloom mentioned in Al's story that he's thinking of running Midnight Bisou in the Florida Lee. Monomoy Girl's already stabled there at Churchill. Maybe we'll see a matchup there. Maybe we'll see it down the line. But that's going to be really interesting because I feel like they're completely different horses now than they were when they faced as 3-year-olds. And what an amazing thing that we still get to see them as 5-year-olds. Like, to Bill's point about how horses don't really run that much anymore, you kind of got to savor these opportunities to watch these horses as older horses, especially fillies and mares too, because they're worth so much in the auction ring. So shout out to everybody that's keeping those horses campaigning and bringing them back. So we would love to see that in the future. Bill, what were your thoughts?
Well, I mean, a lot of the same thoughts as you had. I mean, Monomoy Girl did what she had to do. Not a very strong field, certainly not a grade 1 level field. I cannot wait for these 2 horses to meet one another. And let's, knock on wood, hope that it happens. So much could go wrong, but they put on such a good show back when they were both 3, and now it's going to be so intriguing to see, as Monomoy Girl stayed on the same progression, having had all this time off, as Midnight Bisou just excelled and gotten to the point where she's the better horse. I mean, if they ran tomorrow, I'd still pick Monomoy Girl based on the fact that she has raced against her 4 times and finished ahead of her all 4, with the only exception, the Cotillion, where she won and was disqualified. However, John Green says he's going to get up on his soapbox about this. So to no further ado, John.
Yeah, I almost went straight to him. I almost skipped Bill.
You guys stole a lot of my thunder with regard to Monomoy Girl's credentials. Personally, I think that if she stopped racing today, she would be in the Hall of Fame. She's had that kind of a career. And the fact that she came off, such a long layoff and won is so impressive and so unprecedented in our industry, especially for a 5-year-old grade 1 mare who really, for all intents and purposes, and 99% of the programs out there, she'd be in the breeding shed right now and not back on the racetrack. Granted, she did not beat a good field. It was a race that was written for her. It was an allowance race that was written for her specifically to run on opening day of Churchill Downs. So that way they could publicize the fact that they had such a great horse running, opening day. The horse that ran second took 10 times to break her maiden and never hit the board in 6 stake races. The horse that ran third was just claimed for $30,000 2 races ago. So was it a stellar field? Absolutely not. Did she win? Yeah, that's what she's supposed to do. She ran. We can get into it. She ran an 85 Beyer, which is only 1 point better than the 3-year-old fillies that won the A Other Than later on that afternoon. As a matter of fact, the 3-year-old fillies that won later on in the afternoon actually ran 7 furlongs faster than Monomoy Girl. So again, she did what she was supposed to do. And I can't take anything away from her career. I wish I had a horse like this in my barn, not every year, but once in a decade, because she's just that kind of a filly. Where I'm disappointed as an owner is when seconds after the horse hit the wire in front, there were press releases that came out that said, she's back. Okay. Pump the brakes, guys. She's back. She ran the 85 Beyer. She wouldn't have even beat the 3-year-old fillies that were running later on in the afternoon in an A other than. And she didn't look that great running, beating a very suspect field, especially in comparison to all the stake races that have been going on during the COVID-19. It was not a stellar field. It was not even a deep field. She did what she was supposed to, not throwing stones at her at all. But owners, act like you've been there before, please. It was a money allowance race on a Thursday at Churchill, for God's sake. It was not a grade 1 race. When she wins a grade 1 or she competes against, the best again and she wins, I will put out an ad saying she's back. But for the love of God, act like you've been there before. The filly won the race and she went right to the winner's circle, stood there, got a picture taken, and went right back to the barn. Do the same thing, for God's sake. Thank you.
I got to move back from my computer. It's smoking right now. I've never been a giant fan of Monomoy Girl. I tried to beat her at every turn. In 2018, she beat me. Look, I thought her performance was good. Given an 18-month layoff, bringing her back, the track was bad. You don't know how she handled it, if she handled it. She was in a bunch of traffic. No, she didn't look particularly comfortable. But when Florent asked her to go, he found the daylight. He sent her through 3 wide at the quarter pole. She put lengths on them and was ridden out. I think she won easily with something in the locker, and I think there's better to come. John, I'm not going to touch what you said. Just
chicken.
Although, let's take it within the context of the aforementioned The Last Dance and Michael Jordan's 2-word facts when he unretired. So I think they were just having a little fun. Your point is taken.
Yeah. Hey, John, I want to jump into this. John, it's too early in the morning to be drinking, pal. I mean, let these people have. These people endured a year and a half where their horse didn't run. They brought her back to the races, you said, when it would have made more sense to just sell her at Keeneland or Fasig-Tipton and breed her or everything. So they had a little fun. What's wrong with having some fun in this sport? People are too buttoned down sometimes. So they put out a kind of a silly little press release saying she's back. They went through a lot with this horse, and I'm sure they were ecstatic. Granted, she didn't win the Arc de Triomphe or the Breeders' Cup Distaff or something like that, but nonetheless, it was a big deal for them. So, I'm sure when you go around telling like 4-year-olds there's no such thing as Santa Claus too in your spare time. So just lighten up, pal. Okay.
Bill, I can tell you that all my life. First of all, again, I will reiterate, the horse is phenomenal, and I wish I owned her. Okay. That being said, I was always taught from the time I was a little kid that if you accomplish something and you worked hard at it, that should be your own reward. Okay. So yes, it's great to have fun in the business. It's great to be involved in the business and have camaraderie and joke around and everything like that. But you don't, send a press release out like that when she gets black type again. Okay. When she wins something other than a money allowance. That was specific.
Well, John, they don't have to, because you promised to take out an ad in the Thoroughbred Daily News on your own nickel, your own dime, congratulating her. So
actually,
you're, and this is being recorded for posterity. You're not backing out.
I was going to say, for the record, I said I would buy an ad. I didn't say it was going to be on TDN. So that's still up for discussion.
Well, we do know that you're, never mind. You're talking about some of your preferred periodicals in the racing business. Sometimes we do wonder where your loyalty is.
I am well read. That's all you have to know, is that I am well read. But listen, I am all for having fun in the game, because God knows there's enough heartache in the game that if you don't have fun, then then you really should have your head examined as to why you're in this business, quite frankly. But celebrate when celebrations are due. And that, to me, my opinion is that you wait until you run against a good field in a black type race, and then you can shout it from the rooftop, she's back. Winning this race didn't impress me to the point where I would say even she's back. And you guys have all commented on the fact about how, funky she looked when she was running.
I mean,
she's not back yet.
She still came back and ran in a race after like a year and a half off. Like,
agreed.
Was there a grade 1 race last weekend that she should have run in instead?
Yeah, there were graded stake races all over the place that she could have run it. My point is, again, not on the horse. The horse did what she was supposed to do. It's on the owners, and I'm one of them. I'm an owner, And you just have to sometimes have a little bit more decorum when it comes to celebrating your actions and your accomplishments. And to me, she was a 3-year-old champion. You want to take out a full-page ad after she wins the Eclipse, that's the time to do it. Not take out full-page ads when she wins a money allowance race on opening day at Churchill. That's just my opinion. And I'm sure I'll hear about it from other people. That's okay.
You will.
I'll move down to 142nd on the mayor list, going forward. It doesn't, at this point, who cares?
We'll make this a regular segment now. John Green's decorum shaming corner.
Yes, because I should be the king of that court, believe me, as I'm in my sweatpants for the 50th straight day. The same pair of sweatpants, no less.
Oh man, nuclear takes from John Green.
Anyway, all right, I'll see you guys in about 6 months. We
appreciate it. But no, just to be serious, there's nothing in the handicap division that is as exciting as Monomoy Girl and Midnight Bizu. So whatever water John tries to throw on this, it's great to have 2 5-year-old top mares that can potentially face off for a championship. So I guess we can run the ads after that race, right, John? That'll be loud.
I agree. I can't wait to see that heavyweight fight between the two of them. I'm sincere and genuine in that.
So while this has been a very positive episode, there are a couple of tracks that are still struggling right now. We wanted to mention them. Parks is still not open. The governor still has not let them reopen, even though other states that have been hit harder the governors have been able to work with the racetracks and the racing organizations to reopen their tracks. Parks already had a big hit when the governor announced that he was taking money out of the racetrack fund, which is funded by slots, and pointing it towards a scholarship fund for local Pennsylvania residents. We've talked about that in the past. So it seems like that situation is at an impasse right now. Hopefully they can make some headway because it doesn't make sense for them not to be running and for everybody else in the country to be running, especially in New York, where things have been a lot worse in terms of the virus. Also, Woodbine, there was an announcement last week that Woodbine will be able to open June 6th. They're going to run the Queen's Plate in September instead of during a traditional summer spot on the calendar. But Woodbine on Sunday, it was reported that they had 2 cases of the equine herpes virus, EHV1, and they now have 20 and 1 confirmed death. So that's a tough thing to deal with, especially when you're dealing with all the coronavirus protocols as well. Bill, I know you talked to a couple of Pennsylvania trainers for this week and for the weekend review this week. I thought it was a good story. What's your feeling on how that's going to get resolved?
I don't know that it is going to get resolved. Things are very bleak there from 2 fronts, as you talked about. The governor there giving no indication that he's going to allow the racetracks to open anytime soon. Now, maybe he's going to have a change of heart, but based on the timelines and everything, you could see the Pennsylvania tracks, particularly Parks, because it's in a county which has been heavily affected by the coronavirus, literally not being able to race till September, October, or something like that. But I think even more worrisome for them is, again, the money that he was ready to take out of the slot money that goes to horse racing, which was basically 200 out of 250 million. And if that money goes, Pennsylvania racing is just done. Or else they're going to be able to race for $4,000 and $5,000 purses. And I think the big concern now is that he was trying to sell this to other politicians because it was just his budget and it had to be approved by members of the House and Assembly and whatnot. And there was some feeling that he wasn't going to get this done, that they were going to block it in order for him to approve his budget. But now the state is going to be able to say that we need this $200 million and you're going to give it to horse racing. And the argument now is all involved about the coronavirus because it's a lot more difficult to sell now than it was 4 months ago that, hey, we're going to give all this money to horse racing when the state is in very bad financial situation, as all states are, because of the amount that they had to put up for the coronavirus and all the things that they had to do with that. So, I hate to say it, but it's things do not look good in Pennsylvania.
No, and add to that the fact that one of the leading farms in Pennsylvania, Northview Stallion, is closing up shop and moving their remaining stallions to their Maryland operation and selling the farm. So I think that the writing is on the wall right now from a lot of different, angles that Pennsylvania racing is in trouble. I know that we've actually, anecdotally, we've actually taken out stall apps at Delaware and Maryland and Monmouth Park, just to cover our bases in the case that Parks doesn't reopen anytime soon. And that's really hard for our main trainer, John Service, who has basically been a staple at Parks for 30 plus years. So it's disappointing. And there's a lot of different factors that have kind of added on to this maybe end result. But it really doesn't look good for Pennsylvania racing. And as far as Woodbine goes, we weren't even thinking about equine herpes this year, although it seems like every year there's an outbreak of it, and usually in Maryland or Fair Hill or West Virginia, for whatever reason, it seems like it's a little more rampant in those racing circles. But now it's in Canada. And it's in Canada when people were leaving Florida to head up there to open up for that upcoming meet. So it's a cluster in a couple of different racing jurisdictions right now. And just as an owner, I'm thankful that we have these other racetracks that we can kind of shift and pivot and send horses to, because it doesn't look good in Pennsylvania for the longer term, and in Canada, at least in the short run.
Can horses still get into Woodbine? They just can't get out, or?
Yeah, they can ship in, can't ship out.
Right. The one thing I don't have really much to add about Pennsylvania more than you guys have already said. I thought it was interesting in the scope of EHV1 virus, the mention of contact tracing, and just how what a push button topic that is these days. But I guess the horses can't really complain about being traced to how they're spreading the disease, but
horses have their rights to privacy.
Yeah.
Of horses. But yeah, we hope that everything gets settled there, because obviously that's like a really scary thing to have to deal with on top of what they're already dealing with on the Woodbine backstretch in terms of reopening. So we hope things get sorted as well as for Parks. And I'm assuming we'll have updates on that in the weeks to come. The Green Group Guest of the Week is sponsored by The Green Group, an accounting, tax consulting, and advisory firm specializing in the thoroughbred industry. With over 500 clients in the horse business, they have proven strategies to save you taxes. For more information on how they can help you, visit www.greenco.com. So this week, as we strive to have the biggest newsmakers on the TDN Writers Room every week, we are thrilled to welcome the Vice President of Racing Operations at NYRA, Martin Panza. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And so before we get into it, I just want to salute you and everybody at NYRA. I know you guys have been working really hard to try to get the track reopened and dealing with the governor's office and all that the past couple months. So we want to say job well done, and we're all very grateful and happy to see Belmont coming back soon.
No, thank you. It's been a tricky 2 months, and we're thrilled to get back in action here. So much appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, we're really excited to see it. So I'll start with the big news of the week, the biggest news of the week, which is the Belmont, which is going to be run June 20th at 9 furlongs. When the Kentucky Derby, when Churchill Downs came out with the Kentucky Derby announcement that it was going to be run September 5th, I felt like that put a lot of things into a scramble. And then the Preakness came out with a date for October 3rd. How did the placement of the Belmont get affected by the announcement of the other Triple Crown rescheduled dates?
So obviously when Churchill let us know that they were moving the Derby to September 5th, it caught us off guard. And obviously we started talking with Stronach Group, and it was tricky because you're working with NBC. Are there TV windows available? I think originally they had asked us, could we run October the 10th? And you start to look at that stage when it first got announced, look, is football going? Because once football starts, handle drops off pretty significantly. And we were sitting here saying, if we run in October and football is operating, we're going to be really up against it. And you started to just, as the pandemic developed and more tracks closed, we started to look back at a bigger picture, and obviously the Arkansas Derby moving to May the 2nd. And we started talking Keeneland, talking about maybe running a 3-day race meet in July 10th, 11th, and 12th, and perhaps the Bluegrass is in that position. We started to make phone calls and talk to the tracks that have major 3-year-old races and tried to start to place them on a calendar in front of us. And Stronach Group was talking about sometime in September or October. And obviously, with them going October 3rd, we didn't really want to run the Belmont Stakes like the week after the Breeders' Cup and be up against the Breeders' Cup and be running a mile and a half in November and maybe up against football at that date. And our board, our racing committee looked and said, listen, there's really nothing in June. And why don't we try to run it in June? We're probably going to be spectator free for the rest of the year. And let's try to help that category by racing in June. You've got the Arkansas Derby, that was run May 2nd. You've got the Matt Winn coming up this weekend. You've got the Indiana Derby, I think now announced for July the 8th. The Haskell is July 17th. I believe that Keeneland is mulling around maybe the Bluegrass on July the 11th. So it made sense. June 20th, June 27th. We ended up on June 20th with NBC. There was a 3-hour window there. And we had talked to Santa Anita. We had told them we're going June 20th. They decided to go June 6th for some reason, but that is what it is. And I guess Authentic is running in that race, and he's probably going to be very tough. For the distance, we mulled that around. It didn't make a lot of sense with horses having not run for several months in a lot of cases to run the Belmont this year at a mile and a half. I'm a big believer in long distance racing. We've always tried to offer longer races in New York. So I get the tradition of the Belmont. For this year, though, with the pandemic, just everything has changed. And for this year, we're just trying to set up a pattern of races. And I think in the next month, as more racetracks make their announcements, a pattern of races, at least for the 3-year-olds, that will get them to the Breeders' Cup in an orderly fashion where a guy can run a horse every month or every 5 weeks. And we have been talking with Churchill and Keeneland and Monmouth Park and California in trying to coordinate that. Doesn't always happen exactly the way we want it, but we're getting pretty close. So I think, it's going to offer, the first chance for a lot of these horses to come together. And I think the mile and 8 distance gives everyone a very fair run to that first turn, obviously at Belmont Park. We looked at a mile and a quarter, but that's a tricky start at Belmont. And so we said, look, why would we penalize a horse if he does get the 9, 10, 11, or 12 going a mile and a quarter? They haven't run in a while. A mile and 8 seemed to make, the most sense to our committee. And that's where we ended up.
Hey, Martin, thanks for joining us this morning. The other big news to come out yesterday was the stakes schedule above and beyond the Belmont Stakes. And the cuts to some of these races were pretty strong. And then, look at them and kind of, you had to take a deep breath and say, wow, isn't this a shame that, these purses went from, in some instances, from 7 figures down to 400,000 or something like that. But it does appear that NYRA made an attempt to prioritize the overnight races and to not cut them nearly as severe when it comes to purses as the stakes races. Let us know if that is indeed the case, and why was the priority put on maintaining overnight races as much as you possibly could?
Sure. So the way the purse account works, about 38% of our purse money in New York comes from our VLTs at Genting, and that casino has been closed since March 15th. So there's no purse money coming in while that casino is closed. And then you take away the on-track attendance as well, so on-track handle. Aqueduct is normally our largest OTB. That's closed. So when you start to put all those pieces in place, the purse account takes a hit. And right now, a lot of these tracks are operating and handle numbers are very big, but it's coming in through ADW, and the purse accounts and the racetracks get a much smaller slice of that because there's a middleman that we have to share some of that money with, whether it's Twin Spires or NYRA Bets or TVG. So when we looked at our purses, we established what we think we're going to earn for the race meet. And we went through, and our first concern was to the everyday horsemen, our overnight purses. You've got to keep those guys in business. And so our committee looked at it, and we ended up with roughly about a blended 13% cut there. And then we took the monies that were left for stakes, which and you started to work backwards from there. We tried to keep our grade ones, and you plug in the Belmont Stakes at $1 million, and you start to plug in the Met Mile at 500,000, and the Manhattan at 4, and the Acorn at 3, and there's X amount of dollars that we could spend on the stake schedule. I think it comes out to about $6 million. We get back about $750,000 in fees, so that stakes schedule is about $5.25 million for this 25-day meet, which is still a massive number compared to most racetracks. We've always, at the Belmont meets and at Saratoga, we've run very high stakes percentages. We have a lot of stakes races in New York. We feel we're sort of a leader for American racing, and that it helps drive the Keeneland sales and the Fasig-Tipton sales and the high end of the market. And so that takes a hit during this pandemic until these casinos get up and running again and that money starts to flow. Our first concern is going to be for that everyday horseman in our overnight races, and we're going to protect those first, and then we'll work back on the stakes from there.
Martin, it's John Green from DJ Stable, and as an owner who has a lot of meat and potato horses that run on Thursday afternoons, I certainly appreciate the fact that racing is back at Belmont and that the purses really haven't been clipped that much, if at all. I mean, 13% is something I'm sure we would all be very pleased to have going forward. You've always been known as being a guy who wants to be innovative and has been putting together a lot of great race series in your history, not only in California, but also in New York. We actually were fortunate enough to win one of the Turf Triple Crown races last year with Thread of Blue. And so we were so excited about that triple, turf racing. That was the first thing that I actually looked at for the upcoming season. Can we talk a little bit about the idea of having a turf Triple Crown in New York, which seemed to have gotten everything you wanted? It got international horses. It got a lot of local horses that stepped up and ran in almost all three of those races. And just give us an idea of not only how you came with that idea, but also what we should expect for the Turf Triple Crown for 2020.
Sure. So we started the Turf Triple Crown last year, and we were very pleased with how it worked out for the first year on each running of those races. We'd had the Belmont Oaks and Belmont Derby for several years, and they're both grade ones, and they've been strong races. And we just started looking at how we could further help the industry by creating a Turf Triple Crown and maybe making turf sires and turf horses at the sales more valuable. And there's a void. We have, obviously a tremendous pattern of races for 3-year-olds on the dirt. And we just started to say, look, we can also develop this pattern for 3-year-olds on the turf. For 2020, with the pandemic, we do rely for European starters in those races. And everything in Europe seems to be pushed back at least a month. And so we're looking at the Turf Triple Crown here, and we'll probably be doing the same thing, pushing everything back a month. We're not quite sure on the exact dates yet, but I think it'll be something where the Saratoga Derby and Saratoga Oaks go first. And then maybe we see the Belmont Derby and Belmont Oaks sometime in September going second. And then the Jockey Club Derby and Oaks following that, maybe late October or November, maybe even at Aqueduct, bringing up the back end of it. So we're going to run it this year. The purses are obviously going to come down a little bit on it, but those opportunities will still be there. It was just a matter of Great Britain's not even racing at the moment. I think Ireland gets back maybe June 7th or 8th. France is back, but I see where Longchamp and Chantilly, unfortunately, were shut down. So pretty much everything in Europe's getting pushed back. And we just felt, even on the American end, with so many tracks not running, people haven't been breaking maidens or winning one other thans. Those stakes races aren't there. So it made sense just to push that series back for this year.
Hey, Martin, Alan Carasso, thanks again for being with us.
Sure, Alan.
There was, I would say, a surprising amount of pushback across social media as regards the distance of the Belmont. Some people questioning whether this is the first step in a series of events that leads to making the Belmont Stakes permanently a 9-furlong race. Could you address that? Is that remotely in discussion?
No, not at all. As soon as things get back to normal, it's back to a mile and a half. It's the test of champions, and it's going back to a mile and a half. The only reason it's a mile and 8 this year is because the whole thing has been thrown up in the air by tracks being closed and the Derby being September 5th. I guess if the Derby stays on September 5th, then anything is possible. But no, our intentions are to go back to June 6th at a mile and a half next year and get back to the traditional Triple Crown.
And not asking you to burn any bridges professionally, but reading between the lines, it seems that you were frustrated at a minimum with the way that this happened. Can you talk about the discussions with Churchill, with Maryland Jockey Club, in terms of the ordering of races, and how were the lines of communication? Were they clear, or you seem to have been blindsided by the Derby decision and then by the Preakness decision?
I think Stronach Group and NYRA were both caught off guard with the decision to move to September 5th. We were notified, the day before, but there wasn't a discussion on, hey guys, we have a pandemic. What should we do with the Triple Crown? It was just, we're moving the Derby to September 5th. And that caught us and Stronach, Group, I think, off guard. Since then, we have been talking and we're trying to work together, for placement of races, obviously at Saratoga, and we're Churchill trying to move a bunch of stakes to Labor Day weekend. So, we're talking with Ben Huffman and Mike Ziegler there. Stronach Group, we've been in conversations with. We talked about, okay, if the Derby's September 5th, could the Preakness be September 19th, and can the Belmont be October 10th? So those were discussions that we had. And then, it's difficult because there's the purse account side of business. You're always trying to run races to generate the most handle, which generates the most purses. And at the same time, you're trying to generate the most handle to also help your company, because we've all got salaries to pay and expenses to pay. And the more we looked at the September and October scenarios, it just didn't work, at least for NYRA. I think Stronach Group, October 3rd, maybe they're hoping they can get some fans. So I think eventually it worked for them in that position. But we try to work together as much as we can. But look, you can put three brothers in a room and they'll disagree sometimes. So, I'm not going to, say that Churchill did the wrong thing. We fully understand. They're hoping that maybe they can get fans September the 5th. I'm not sure if that's going to be realistic, but I get the decision they made at the time. But it did throw all of us for a little bit of a loop. Since then, we've been trying, like I said, especially with the 3-year-olds, okay, how can we lay this out where these top 3-year-olds will get a chance to run every 4 or 5 weeks with grade 1 races and get them to the Breeders' Cup? And unfortunately, this year, there won't be a 1.5 mile race in that mix. But I think as tracks make their announcements over the next month or so, people will start to see that there is a pattern there and there was some thought process. And we have been trying to talk to each other and lay things out.
Just wanted to say sorry you had to sit through John Green's gratuitous self-congratulatory "A Thread of Blue" reference right there. Got it right here. I got that.
Martin was nice enough to actually hand us the trophy at Saratoga. I mean, that was the first time I met you, so I always have fond memories of that.
Yeah. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
It was a big win that day for that horse. Yeah.
But so you mentioned Saratoga, and I kind of wanted to pivot to that. Basically, are you 100% committed to running the meet at Saratoga? And if so, why do you think that that's important even without fans there?
So we are working with the governor's office and the Saratoga county supervisors and the health department up there. And our intentions are to try and run the meet up there. Look, Saratoga Racetrack is a big part of that community. And whether there's fans there or if it's just, the racing people or hopefully owners as well, we're going to do everything we can to try and help that town. At the same time, Saratoga is a very strong brand, and we know by running our races up there, we're going to handle more money. And when we handle more money, obviously that helps NYRA stay afloat as a business. It also gets more purse money out to owners and trainers, which we think this year is extremely important to do. We're working on the protocols. We've been working with the Gaming Commission. So we're getting closer to getting the Oklahoma training track open. And we've been working with the health department up there to make sure they're comfortable that everyone that comes up there will be tested for the virus, and that either you've got a negative test or you've got an antibody test before you arrive up there. We want to keep our horsemen healthy, but we also want to make the town feel comfortable that we're being responsible. That town needs us. I mean, the restaurants, the hotels, whether it's just the horsemen and some owners, or whether we're allowed to have some fans, a lot of businesses on that town rely on that race meet to make it through the year. So we're going to do everything we can to help our horsemen and owners, and at the same time help that community.
Martin, I want to stay on the subject of Saratoga. The Saratoga stake schedule is one of the last pieces of the puzzle. I know you still have some work to do on it, but can you give us a little bit of a preview of what it might look like? And specifically, is it set in stone that the Travers is going to be moved rather than run 1 week before the Kentucky Derby?
So we're talking with Churchill Downs, and we've been waiting for their schedule of what they're trying to do. And I think they've been working with Kentucky Downs, and we're waiting for them to get schedules to us on what they're trying to do. There's a few races that that would probably cause Saratoga a problem. So we're open to perhaps moving the Travers or the Alabama, but we need them to work with us. This can't just be a one-way street. And we're talking with Churchill. We've been talking for the last 3 or 4 weeks, and hopefully in the next week or so we can get that ironed out, and we can start to sort of put a Travers and an Alabama, some race dates on when they'll be run, and put a schedule together for the entire Saratoga meet. We're also trying to buy a little bit of time to see if our casino gets up and running at any time, and if we can get a little clearer picture on when that might take place, because obviously that adds some more purse money to the equation. So I think in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we'll start to solidify a Saratoga stake schedule. We're going to do everything we can to try and keep, a grade one each week of the race meet. But there's different scenarios out there right now. So I'm not going to say the Travers and Alabama are moving yet. We think they will, but we need Churchill to sort of work with us on some other issues.
Martin, the one common theme that we're hearing from a lot of the executives and decision makers in the industry, both the racing and the breeding industries, has been communication. And that's been something that's been lacking in our industry for a number of years, maybe even decades. So for me, I'm very pleased to hear all the different things you're saying as far as we spoke to the other racetracks, we spoke to the other racing venues, we spoke to, NBC and to the Commerce Chamber at Saratoga. That's like a breath of fresh air for all of us. So thank you again for being the pivot man on a lot of those things. If you could be racing czar and be in charge of the entire racing industry, what one thing would you attack at this point that you think we can all improve on as an industry?
Well, I think there's a group called the Safety Coalition, and that's basically NYRA, Churchill Downs, Distronic Group, Del Mar, Keeneland, Breeders' Cup. We've all been working on new safety rules, new medication reforms, new reforms for track maintenance. And I think in the next month or so, a lot of that material is going to start coming out. So we've been working together. We've had a lot of arguments together, but I think we found common ground. And, whip rules, LASIX rules. I mean, we're trying to move the industry forward, and we're trying to do it unified so that the rules are the same from state to state. And I agree with you. Sometimes when you're trying to work together and you're holding meetings, it's hard to go out in the public and actually talk about what's going on. But we've been working very hard. I think in the next month, a lot of stuff is going to start to come out through the NTRA. I think the industry, for the most part, through this virus, has really come together. Maybe we haven't portrayed it correctly to the public, but I know I'm probably on calls at least twice a week with various groups, working on new rules, working on how we can unify things. So there's that end of, let's get safety rules out there that each track will follow, that they're uniform, that protects the horse even more. Let's get medication rules that make sense, that further protect the horse, that get drugs out of race day racing events. Let's get our testing where it's equal and that we have belief in the testing. Let's work on out of competition testing, which, I've been at NYRA for going on 7 years now, and I think I've had one questionable out of competition test. So NYRA pays for out of competition testing, and we run it ourselves in New York, and we do about 16 to 1,700 tests every year. So we're doing, 30 to 40 tests every week. If a trainer gets hot during the races, if he's won 5 races in the last week or two, we might test his entire barn. So there's a lot of segments that we're working on. I think the industry is really pulled together. I think before the virus hit, we obviously had situations at Santa Anita. We had horse racing wrongs. We had PETA. We had groups that were questioning what we were doing, and the industry was coming together. And I think through the virus, it's forced us even more to work together. I was just on the phone with the guys at Churchill talking about testing and how they're testing their people in the barn area, how we're testing people here, how those people may be able to come to Saratoga. And then when they have to leave Saratoga to go back to Churchill, helping test at Saratoga for the Kentucky people. So I think we're coming together. We need to do a better job of probably letting the public know how much we're actually doing behind the scenes.
Martin, you've accomplished a lot. You've had a very distinguished career as a racing executive in California prior to coming to New York. This entire pandemic and all the challenges that it's brought up, how difficult a challenge has this been for you within the scope of your career?
I think for probably the last 6 weeks, I haven't been a racing executive. I've now learned about county health departments, how to test for virus, how to antibody test, where I can find registered nurses to help us, how to set up isolation cottages, how to set up quarantine cottages, how to get people fed that are in isolation. In New York, for our little group, the chaplain, Umberto, has done a tremendous job. We have a group here called BEST, the Backstretch Employees Service Team. We've really, our safety stewards, NITA with Joe Applebaum and Will, we've really all sort of come together as a team just to try and help our backstretch employees get through this situation and NYRA employees get through it and try to stay healthy. And when they're not healthy, try to get them the help that they need. A lot of them do not have health insurance, and it's trying to help them. If they've been laid off, trying to help them get onto unemployment. If they can't get unemployment, it's making sure they have a house over their head, making sure that if they need to see a doctor, they can. So it's been interesting. It's been challenging at times, and it's been frustrating, especially in New York. We're sort of the Wuhan of the virus, and for a while there, look, testing wasn't available, and it was very hard to get to a doctor, and it was just sort of soul searching in a lot of ways, because you were struggling to find how could you help people, and then you had this other element of when are we going to be racing again. And you're sort of like, you know what, guys, like, let's put this in perspective. We got to look after people's lives right now and get them the help that they need. Just trying to find these things, the safety mask, the first 3 weeks or month, I mean, it was impossible. So you're calling all over the place, trying to find people that, we could buy 25,000 masks from. So the job changed from racing executive to healthcare sort of official, and Glenn Kozak and Joe Applebaum and Dave O'Rourke and sort of everyone, we just sort of shifted gears into, okay, who can we reach out to? Where can we get help? And that's not going to go away anytime soon. I mean, we're we're getting ready to race, obviously, and we got the condition book out and the stakes books out, but I've got 3 calls this afternoon with health department officials and trying to get Saratoga going. And, it's the same at Churchill Downs and most racetracks across the country. So right now we're all pivoting and learning about quarantines and virus and vaccines and everything else. If anything, it's brought us together. I've met so many people in the barn area that I didn't know before. And so, it's sort of racing, I think, has always been a family. The backstretch has always been a family. And I think most backstretches at all of these racetracks have really come together through this.
Martin, you've been very generous with your time. I have one more question before we let you go. I wanted to know about your communication with the governor's office. I think Governor Cuomo as a New Yorker, has done a great job, great leadership throughout this pandemic. A lot of people, I think, see him as an anti-racing governor. I don't necessarily get that. I think, if anything, he just doesn't know much about the sport. How has your communication been with the governor's office?
So about 6 or 7 weeks ago, we typed up a 18 or 19 page protocol report, and we passed it along to the Gaming Commission with a request to come back to racing on May 22nd. And that went through the channels through Gaming Commission to the Health Department into the governor's office. And then at that stage, we obviously have a 17-person board of directors for NYRA, and several of those board members started to reach out to the governor's office and just say, look, we've got a set of protocols. You've deemed us essential for workouts in the morning. What we're doing in the morning, we can duplicate in the afternoon with maybe 60 additional employees. The governor, I think, especially in New York, look, we've had, I don't know what it's up to now, 250,000 positive cases and X amount of deaths. I mean, I think he's done an outstanding job for the hand he was dealt. Just finding PPE. And I know, there was a stretch there that if you went over to the hospitals on Long Island, they were just packed. And so, I had so many friends calling me from different parts of the country, and they just didn't quite get the situation we were in or the severity of what was going on. You couldn't get PPEs. You couldn't get masks. You had people that were sick. You couldn't get them tested because there just weren't any test kits available. And as much as the governor was trying to reach out and find stuff, it was just very hard to find. I think you hit the nail on the head from a racing standpoint. I'm not sure he fully understands racing or is completely into it, but he came to Saratoga last year for the first time, and his aides were like, you know what? He had the most fun there, and he walked away from it saying, this was really cool. Like he really appreciated the time he spent at the track, and his aides sort of were telling us, like, he goes to a lot of events and he doesn't usually speak that highly of them when he leaves. And for that trip to Saratoga, I think he really understood it. He saw how many people were there and what an impact it has on that community. And I think, even the June 1st announcement, the announcement he made the other day, they wouldn't tell us, but I was literally up and down. One day I thought, you know what, we're going to be allowed to start racing. Our protocols are working. We're going to get something from the office, and we wouldn't hear anything from them. And the next day you'd be at a complete low, and you'd be like, oh my God, if you look at what he's saying, we're not going to be open till July. And literally, I think on a Friday, I called the Gaming Commission and said, look, should we pivot to 3 days a week at Saratoga, dirt racing only, and we'll just van in? And they said, you know what, just give it another day or two. And the next day he made the announcement on the Saturday that racetracks could open. So I think he just doesn't know a lot about the sport. I don't think he's against it. I think in the time that I've been back here, I've always found him, if you can get stuff in front of him and it makes sense, it may take a little bit of time, but they're going to approve it. So right. I think, our next goal is to see if we can get him to the Belmont Stakes to give the trophy away. First major sporting event in New York on NBC. We're hopeful that maybe we can get him over to give the trophy away. We're glad to be open, and we're glad that he opened us. And, I think he treated us fairly in the situation we're in New York. I think he's done the right thing.
If you ever want to convince anybody about racing, just take them to a day at Saratoga. Nobody's ever had a bad time. Yeah. All right, Martin, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it. I just want to echo what I said at the beginning. We thank you and your team and everybody at NYRA for all the hard work in getting Belmont reopened, and we are looking forward to the meet exponentially more than we would have normally, so we appreciate it.
Yep, no, I appreciate it. And look, if you guys ever have questions on things, we're happy to answer them. There's some things we can't always talk about, but I'm happy to sort of give you why we made a decision or what the thought process was. So, please, feel free to email or just pick up the phone and ask. If I can give you an answer, I certainly will.
Yeah, and this was great. You answered a lot of our questions, and I think the readers and the viewers are really going to enjoy the thoughts process behind these kind of decisions, and we really appreciate it.
Yep. No, thank you very much, all of you. Have a good day.
All right, thanks, Martin. Stay safe.
Thank you, Martin.
Yep.
The Green Group Guest of the Week is sponsored by The Green Group, an accounting, tax, consulting, and advisory firm specializing in the thoroughbred industry. With over 500 clients in the horse business, they have proven strategies to save you taxes. As the Green Group Guest of the Week, Martin Panza will receive a free 1-hour tax consultation. For more information, visit www.greenco.com. We'll be right back after this message from The Green Group.
The Green Group is widely recognized as the top-rated tax and accounting firm specializing in the horse business. Why do the top owners, breeders, pinhookers, and trainers trust the Green Group as their tax advisors? The difference is experience. Firm founder Len Green has over 4 decades of experience owning, breeding, and racing horses. First-hand knowledge gives Green Group clients proven tax and money-saving strategies. Visit the Green Group at www.greenco.com. The Green Group, proven strategies to save you taxes.
That's going to do it for this week's edition of the TDN Writers Room presented by Keeneland. Remember, all wagers through Keeneland Select this month, proceeds will go to help nourish the backstretch and help the Lexington community during this pandemic. I want to thank Bill Finley, John Green, Alan Carasso, our Green Group Guest of the Week, Martin Panza, our producer, Patty Wolf, our editors, Nathan Wilkinson and Anthony LaRocca, and our production coordinator, Michelle Sobrino. Stay safe out there. We will see you next week.